Hello, this is Desiree Hendricks Patterson along with Candace Akers and Nicole Greigar. The case study that we selected was 2.3 VW's Massive Deception. We will be using Nash's 12 questions to address the case study. Just a summary about the case study. Between 2008 and 2015, VW installed software in about 11 million cars in Europe, South Korea, Canada, and the United States that was designed to defeat emissions tests. So the computer program, the software could recognize the difference between an emission test and a road condition and temporarily activated emissions controls during the emissions test. And so that is what led to summarize what happened in this case study.
Nash's question one asks if you have defined the problem accurately. In the problem involving the Volkswagen company and their diesel emissions scandal, Volkswagen deliberately used software to cheat emissions tests, falsely presenting their diesel vehicles as compliant with environmental regulations. So that is the underlying problem that we need to work through Nash's 12 questions to decide what we would have done.
Okay, so for question number two, how would you define the problem if you stood on the other side of the fence? If I were standing on the side of the consumer, which is where I would be, the problem is the deception to the consumers and to the Emissions Protection Agency, the people who monitor emissions, who thought that these VW vehicles were meeting the emission requirements. No one would knowingly, I'm saying, break the law. And so when you think about what the problem is from a consumer aspect, they would be just being lied to about what you are getting. In reality, the results were of the deception was that environmental harm and additional emissions, like those legalities are in place for a specific reason, but then also the cost to the customers who brought these vehicles thinking that they were um, better on emissions for all of those reasons. But then also like the money that was spent out because they weren't as efficient as they claimed to have been as well.
The next question that we find ourselves asking is, how did this situation occur in the first place? Well, let's be honest. Volkswagen was more concerned about making a profit and dominating the market over ethical practices. And unfortunately, this led them, right, to make the decision to implement the defeat devices within the cars, which allowed them to pass emissions tests. And unfortunately, at the same time, while they were allowing various vehicles to pass these emission tests, they were also allowing vehicles to emit the same harmful pollutants at levels far above legal limits. Super unfair for them to allow this situation to occur, but that is exactly what happened, is that they were more concerned about the profit and dominating the market than they were about behaving as an ethical organization that decided to put those practices first.
Nash's question four asks, to whom do you give your loyalty as a person and as a member of the corporation? In this case, the key stakeholders include the company's employees, shareholders, customers, regulatory bodies, and the broader public affected by the environmental pollution.
Okay, so for question number five, what is your intention in making this decision? VW made this decision in hopes of maybe making more money by having vehicles that meet emission standards, but then still perform well. So you're not losing power and all the things that come along with a high performing car to meet these emission standards. And so the intention in addressing the scandal itself, so for VW to even take the steps to address the scandal, was a way for them to try to restore trust in the company after they had done this for so long. So from 2008 until 2015, the reason or their intention in addressing the scandal at all was in hopes to restore trust in the company, and that they would moving forward, they would comply with those legal standards for emissions and just being considerate of what had been done.
How does this intention compare with the likely results? Well, the whole intent of cheating emissions, that test specifically, led them to deal with significant legal issues, significant financial issues, and even some damage to Volkswagen's reputation. Unfortunately, this also means that because they were allowing cars to pass the test, that means that there was some environmental harm that was happening, but then also a loss of consumer trust. Customers were not necessarily excited about trusting Volkswagen after learning about this unfortunate situation. And of course, there were efforts to try and rectify the situations at hand. However, those legal penalties or any compensation or long term impacts definitely will exist for that brand.
Question 7 asks, whom could your decision or action injure? In this case, Volkswagen's actions injured the environment, consumers who purchased the affected vehicles, regulatory bodies misled by false data, and the public who were exposed to higher pollution levels.
Engage the affected parties in a discussion of the problem before you make your decision. That would have been an ideal situation if VW had considered conversations, considering ethical compromise before they decided to put the device in the vehicle. There's no documentation given in the case study that any of those things actually happened, but I'm assuming that maybe there were conversations about what the implications could be. It is possible to infer the impact of those decisions even without the conversations being had, but the pressure was on VW to make money and to pass the emissions test, but still have a good vehicle. Although it would have been ideal to have these conversations, the conversations did not happen.
Are you confident that your position will be as valid over a long period of time as it seems now? Well, truth be told, the decision that Volkswagen made to cheat this test and then install the defeat device was definitely not something that they thought of as a long term consequence, right? You can definitely tell that, unfortunately, they probably believed that they wouldn't get caught or caught up in the situation. And unfortunately, that is not the case. And the truth is that when you are making decisions in a company, the whole point is for you to be ethical because your decision should be able to stand the test of time. Over time, the decisions that have been made should be able to be looked at, reviewed, and even used maybe as a sounding board for compliance and sustainability for others down the line to reference over time.
Question 10 asks, could you disclose without qualms your decision or action to your boss, your CEO, the board of directors, your family, or society as a whole? In this case, Volkswagen's actions could not be openly disclosed to stakeholders without significant backlash, which is why the deception lasted for so long. Transparency and honesty are essential to maintain trust and integrity. In this case, Volkswagen did not adhere to that, and that's why the deception was such a big deal and led to such a significant amount of fines.
Okay, for question number 11, what is the symbolic potential of your actions if it's understood or if it's misunderstood? So, if my action was understood, if VW's action was understood, it would be like they were just being greedy and deceptive in general. They were disregarding the environment, the laws, and the regulations of having emissions. If the action was misunderstood, so based on their action, somebody else could assume like, oh well, VW is the victim because they're dealing with all these unrealistic expectations of emission control. But you can see that this is still a good car, and although there are better emissions or worse, like the emissions are worse, is because VW, they had such unrealistic hopes in terms of trying to maintain a competitive market, a good car, and maintain emission control.
Under what conditions would you allow exceptions to your stand? I wouldn't, because in this case, these practices were deceitful. They definitely caused harm to the environment, which potentially means harm to others. I mean, at the end of the day, it definitely tarnished or impacted the reputation of Volkswagen. Now, it's highly possible that if there were exceptions, maybe that has to do with like regulatory compliance. However, when a case like this presents itself and it has more to do with intentional cheating, knowing that they were installing devices that were literally going to lie about a test, ethical principles here should not allow for exceptions.